荒れる理由、いや、多くの人にとって荒れないで済む理由は何だと思う？
才能かな。才能があればやりたいことがはっきりする。それに夢中になればいい。
いい答えだ。でも才能が見つからなかったら？
恋愛とか？
なるほど。それも一つの答えだな。
I believe this sentiment captures quite a mighty chunk of the narrative that After the Rain builds. I say despite the fact that the clip is from Clannad. But while Clannad focuses exclusively on the relationship side of things, After the Rain provides a more detailed outlook for both approaches. In this video, I would be focusing more on the thematic aspects and the show's approach towards its topic, because I think the beautiful soundtrack, the lighting, the coloring, contextual use of rain, the subtle directional cues all adding to the atmosphere deserve a video in their own right, but I'll try to incorporate these alongside as well. After the Rain follows a standard slice of life setup. We begin with a shot of Akira in her classroom, looking unamused, and we feel like it's gonna be a typical high school setup. But then we begin to see and feel that her workplace may also have relevance. However, the show quickly gets to the point, and the premise suddenly becomes interesting, because it gets controversial. Akira, who is soft-spoken, a bit awkward, especially in love as we find out later, blunt but refreshingly forward, seems to have feelings for Kondo, who is also soft-spoken, and is a ditz, and is an overly apologetic, perhaps indicative of his low self-esteem, middle-aged guy. And while at the same time there are these butterflies and these goddamn beautiful bubbles in Akira's workplace, her school life, in her mind at least, seems to have come to a limbo state. Yeah, the use of motion here I think speaks for itself honestly in depicting her mind space. So, let's dive into the approach the show takes via its characters. After the Rain is not a romance show in the traditional sense. I mean, of course, we have this age gap setup and the fact that he's her boss. The latter part isn't elaborated much in the show simply because of the fact that they never hit it off to begin with. But the non-traditional approach also has to do with how the narrative, this love narrative, ultimately resolves. The age gap juxtaposition works well to add to the dynamic in their interaction. For example, Akira is a very young lady. Her falling in love evocates feelings of first-time love, the beauty of it, and also evocates feelings or tinges of nostalgia, even for the relatively younger audience, while also giving a sense of purity and innocence to this spectacle as well. This is a good testament to the show's atmospheric depiction of Akira's initial spark. For now, though, we only get to see Akira's side of things, and for Kondo we only see him longing for the past, combined with the fact that he's divorced, to get a sense of his mind space. And by the end of episode 1, we get this nice little setup involving Akira's workplace life, her school life, and a bit of Kondo's mindset. Akira's blunt and yet forward nature leads her to confess to Kondo, but Kondo's low self-esteem and insecurity allows him to view things otherwise, but ultimately Akira's persistence wins. This naturally leads to the second point in the narrative as to why Akira likes Kondo. While the atmospheric depiction of Akira's mind space after her injury and the use of rain and sunlight contrast serve to show that it didn't matter to her what his age or position was, but rather he was simply there at that point in her life. The show goes on to bring a pretty interesting point about love, though with due qualifications. They have this mature, somewhat charming conversation concerning the social implications of this relationship, which Kondo simply uses as sort of a mask at this point. All of this is interspersed with some awkward tension and a nice little comedic break. All of this leads up to one of my favorite scenes in the whole show. It is here that Akira brings up the point about whether there has to be a need for a reason to like a person. She further reiterates. And it's here that Kondo understands the weight of the situation. We also get a further exploration of Kondo's outlook from episode 1 about how it's not possible to get his past back. And while this works in conjunction with Kondo's general concern for Akira and doing the right thing by telling her to reconsider all this, his somber self-depreciation and not simply a bout of longing, is indicative of some more deep-rooted regrets about his past. And the plot thickens. While episode 4, I believe, now viewing in hindsight, does branch off an unexplored plotline about Kase, it, alongside episode 5, does serve as a further development of their unconventional relationship. In a very conventional setting, in a very conventional way, and sometimes in a not so conventional way, or rather simply in an anime-like way. Here, we also get this beautiful shot of Akira from Kondo's perspective, perhaps for the first time in such a manner. Her looking away, and him reflecting on it. I don't want to get hurt, as Kondo says, and this adds a new, more realistic and relatable dimension to their relationship, all the while leading us to ponder about the particulars of his past. Meanwhile, episode 5 gives us a glimpse of his rather obsessive hobby, and their dynamic seems to be getting meatier for us. Now, the reason I'm elaborating in detail here on their mindset is because afterwards from episode 6, the show starts to emphasize more on the self part, the one I referred to in this title, and it's important to know how this mindset contributes and complements towards that end. And all this while, we have been getting a further disconnect between Akira and her school life, i.e. track life, i.e. Haruka. Yeah, just the show emphasizing their silence through some nice visual storytelling. In episode 6, we now get a more urgent sense of what Akira has been missing, and in fact, wistfully longing for, even if he misses it as just part of her spurious fleeting thoughts. Now, of course, Akira's injury is responsible for the situation, but it also has to do with her mindset. He constantly rejects or looks away from her callouts, a fairly erroneous but ultimately human way. Of course, this is not to misconstrue that her love for Kondo was just simply a means of escape. I simply don't believe that to be the case. I mean, it's not like there were no hints of Akira wanting to pursue her passion, either subconsciously, vicariously, or as subtle cues before. But from here, the show actually starts to build up in this direction. So in this regard, the book reading dialogue, as I like to call it, in episode 6 is quite fascinating to me. Interestingly, it's not meant to be understood anything outside the literal terms for both the characters, for both Akira and Kondo. Both of them are oblivious to the metaphorical meaning of their dialogue. For us audience, however, there are clear parallels with the way Akira's and Kondo's current relationship and interaction holds. The episode ends with this mention of a new call out for Akira. For Kondo, it ends on a perhaps more perturbing note as you try to make sense of his hobby of reading and writing books and its link with his past. While we get a further fleshing of his hobby later on in the episodes, Kondo's buried regrets eats at him the more so he looks into a certain book, a pain that he just seems to be obsessed with. And he ends up saying something he didn't actually mean towards Akira. Akira quickly reflects on her impulsive nature, thinking as if he was all in the wrong, thinking as if he was the one driving Kondo to the edge, that perhaps she may only be using Kondo as a means of escape. This leads to perhaps the most emotional scene in the entire show. Here, Akira is glad from her entirety that he isn't a burden to Kondo and that he isn't simply using him as an escape. And Kondo, despite his regretful past, his wistful longing, doesn't view this experience as a simple stroking of his nostalgia, and couldn't help but love, like truly love, Akira back, if only in that iota of time. And this is why I think this is the first time that they truly emotionally connected. Of course, Kondo, being the mature guy, comes to his senses and quickly shrugs it off, himself acknowledging the recklessness of his action later on. So while we do see a greater connection and emotional understanding between the two, we still see that there is still a romantic disconnect between the two, with good reason, of course. Moving onwards, it is with Chihiro that we learn that writing was actually Kondo's passion and poison, and not simply a hobby. And it is here, all of a sudden, where I believe that the directional twist in the show that was being built up ever so subtly earlier from episode 6 actually launched. We are not adults, we are classmates. With this simple and yet profound set of words, Chihiro managed to reignite a spark in Kondo, all the while making him reflect on his outlook about his middle-aged life. In contrast, Akira's school life, her self-part, so to say, was all the more crumbling. Her bluntness, rigidness, and this state of limbo kept on eating away at her, pushing away all the elements belonging to that part of her life. And now we see these clear parallels and the divergences of their paths and the possible consequences should they continue to follow it. And yet, throughout the show, Akira had actually been responding to these callouts, even if so in a nostalgic half-assed manner. She had been responding, she had been reacting, she had been acting nonetheless because she still had that youthful spark. She wasn't on that path fully yet. For this reason, I believe it is very well worth noting that Akira wished to get back with Haruka towards the end of episode 9, not necessarily getting together with Kondo. And all this build-up culminates to my favorite episode of the series, right after my second favorite episode of the series. The swallow dialogue, as I like to call it, is such a nice testament to the subtle direction and writing of the show. I really do admire the dovetailing between Akira and Kondo in this dialogue, and this time, unlike the reading dialogue, both of them very well understood the implications of their current path. Kondo had a dejected outlook of his current situation because of his past, his sense of loss of youth and ambition, while Akira had hoped to find something with Kondo, some meaning with Kondo, while being left behind by the swallows, and he was ultimately on the course to forgetting the desire to look at the sky. I mean, there could be happiness for both in their current paths, just not fulfilling happiness. And of course, the impact of such a dialogue would not have been profound had it not been for Akira's increasing disconnect with Haruka, Kondo's reignition of his passion, the age gap dichotomy, the parallels, and of course, the emotional connection that they both shared. As a thank you, Akira reciprocates with, "I want to read your books," something that Kondo had been meaning to hear for a long, long time. Passions bubble up, build up, and after some hesitation and mustering up the strength to finally let go, a final push was what Akira needed, leading to this absolutely wonderful and gorgeous finale. Everything crystal clear. Finally, it's worth noting that the show doesn't outright reject the notion of love and finding happiness through it in place of focusing simply on the self, but rather shows how both can be codependent and reinforce each other to build a complete you. While some people may find happiness one way, others may find it via ambition, and at times, while these two can be complementing, they can also be mutually exclusive. They may require us to go our separate ways and demand strength to let one go. The romance, so to speak, in this show takes a very unconventional route, perhaps a sort of romance with our passion and desires. It is a very personal and intimate aspect, and yet a very grand one that affects us all. Please feel free to critique or offer any insights about the video, and please like the video if you, liked it. I know my voice is pretty monotonous, and I'll try to work on the tones in the future videos if I do make them, and perhaps get some better recording equipment while I'm at it. But again, let me know of things I should improve on. Thanks, and see you next time.